So the Netflix original Time Cut tells of a girl who goes back to the year 2003 to save her sister from a serial killer. And if that sounds incredibly familiar to you, you are not alone. We got this exact same movie no more than a couple of years ago in Totally Killer on Amazon Prime. But it's kind of wild because this movie was actually put into production a year before that one. This one came out in 2021. Totally Killer came out in 2022. But I almost guarantee nobody knows or cares about that. This is a textbook example of the early bird gets the worm. So as I just said, Time Cut tells of a girl who goes back in time to save her sister from a serial killer. Right off the bat, this movie is going to draw insane comparisons to that movie Totally Killer because it seems like it's a direct ripoff. But let me just say, this movie has all of the similarities and none of the appeals that movie has, because what this movie is trying to do and how it comes off feels completely different than Totally Killer. Totally Killer felt like it was trying to do commentary on the 80s. And the 80s, let me just say this, they feel like a completely different genre than the early 2000s. I get there's a generational gap going from 2024 to 2003, but it doesn't feel nearly as massive as going from 2024 to the 80s. That cultural divide, widely apparent in this movie. And there's just a ton of other similarities in this one that are kind of the same as that one. They're just not done as well. Instead of saving her mom, she's going back to save her sister. The killer is not called the Sweet 16 killer, he's called the Sweetly Slasher. Try saying that 10 times fast. And a massive difference in this movie is this movie really feels like it has no style to it compared to Totally Killer. That movie was definitely a satire comedy. It had a lot of artistic things going for it, the way they were flashing back and forth, present to the past. This movie chooses to do none of that. The opening scene, you have somebody getting killed, you're not sure who it is when it takes place. Then this girl finds a time machine, goes back to the past, not really explained how that works. And then she's just in the past trying to undo events. And this movie's a lot more concerned with the ethical repercussions of time travel. If you change one definite thing, would you risk that to change other potential things? Let me just say, it's not that interesting. The questions they're asking and the way they're presenting them, there's just nothing in this movie that even remotely resembles a slasher for the first 45 minutes. You're just hanging out with high school girls, and they're not even interesting high school girls at that. Goes back in time, she meets her sister, she's debating if she wants to save her and this definite event for other potential things, and it's just way too concerned with the science and the sci-fi behind time travel. Stopped for a second, was debating, am I watching Interstellar or a straight to Netflix slasher? I also found that first 45 minutes of this film's buildup to be painstakingly boring. I didn't care about any of these characters, anything they talked about. There's a scene where the main character is sitting down with her parents and she describes to them that she got a NASA internship, and they just seemingly don't care. They're telling her to get something else, get a different job. And it was at that point I thought, oh, the writing's going to be bad in this one. These characters are all cartoony and they're cardboard and they're just not interesting. Because there's obviously an interesting moral dilemma question there. If you change one thing, what is the ripple effect of that? How do we alter the future? I came to this film for a Netflix slasher, lighthearted comedy. You don't get any of that. It's just way too concerned with being serious with that time travel premise. So it feels like a very boring and cliched derivative slasher film. It has weird sci-fi elements thrown into it. Continuity makes no sense. It's just paced really poorly. I was really bored watching this. And I know it can sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but there will definitely be comparisons between Totally Killer and this because they feel like the same movie when you go to the login screen and you put them on. But Totally Killer just does everything you want in this genre of film way better. The killer's mask looks a lot better. The killer has a lot more personality when he's killing. The main character in this one I found to be a lot more annoying and just boring and cliche than Totally Killer's. At least to me, the main sell of Totally Killer was that cultural contrast. You're going back from 2024 to the 80s, wildly different cultural landscape based on where we're at now, how lax it used to be, seeing somebody who would be considered woke or a little bit more liberal nowadays, going back to the 80s, how lax they were, how little they cared about political correctness. That was the humor of it all, and it poked fun at everybody. Older generations, younger generations, how ridiculous everybody is in their own ways. This movie just has none of that going for it. So the only real cultural contrast you get in this one is going back from 2024 to the 2000s and noticing some of the most recognized hits in music. It doesn't really feel like there's any purpose to going back to that year. And because there's no purpose going back to that year, the main character just feels a lot more flat and a lot more boring on screen. The main character of Totally Killer, Jamie, I believe her name was, Really funny and interesting character because you're watching her navigate the 80s, a time period she is just completely in over her head with. And she's getting to know her parents and how they differed, and you have that little funny dynamic. This one, she's kind of hanging out with her sister. Nobody really seemingly questions the whole time travel thing. There's even consistent jokes. Hey, there's our time traveler. So the very thing that makes this subgenre work of these weird blend of horror films, this satire comedy, this feels like a horror movie that takes itself way too seriously, but it's just not interesting. And then going back to the killer, if you want to talk about the horror elements of this, you have the Sweetly slasher and then you had the Sweet 16 killer. I mean, look at the masks here. What the fuck kind of great value mask is that? So the killer is not very interesting in this one either because the mask looks like something straight off the Walmart shelf. And then some of the kills, there's some interesting ideas at play here. Some of the setups, what I thought they were going to do, I was kind of interested in seeing where they went. But then it just takes the lazy route. It goes off screen and just cuts the gore and you don't get to see anything. So the kills are completely lackluster as well. All I'm left thinking when I watch this movie is, why am I not watching Totally Killer? It's just a very strange film because if that other movie didn't come out and we didn't have direct comparisons and people didn't think this was an absolute ripoff, this could be entertaining to some, but knowing that movie exists, there's just no reason to watch this movie. This movie's complete background noise. So I don't know, guys, if you guys have seen this one, comment down below, let me know, or just go watch Totally Killer. That one's a lot better. I've already reviewed it on the channel. I'm going to put a link to that review at the end of this review, but if you haven't subscribed already, join me down below. Peace.